The train swayed gently as it sped through the evening countryside, carrying with it a quiet chorus of wheels grinding on steel, the low hum of conversation, and the occasional metallic clang echoing from the joints of the track. The carriage was filled with people returning from work, some leaning against the windows with weary faces, others half asleep, their hands wrapped tightly around worn bags. A group of students sat further down, their laughter subdued after a long day of classes, their bright uniforms slightly rumpled. And among all these passengers sat a soldier, rigid and silent, his posture unmistakable, even without the crisp uniform that marked him as different. He was a tomb guard. Though off-duty and traveling home after his watch, the habits of discipline clung to him like a second skin. His back was impossibly straight, his gaze fixed forward as though the horizon itself were another line he was bound to protect. Years of service had trained his body into stillness, his face into a mask of calm detachment. To most passengers he was just another man in uniform, perhaps returning from a posting, perhaps heading to visit family. But to him, each breath carried the weight of silent vows, the kind that could never be shed even when the shift ended. As the train lurched gently, a soft sound cut through the usual noise, a girl's muffled sobs. He turned slightly, almost against his own discipline, and saw her no more than 15, in a school uniform that looked one size too big, her backpack slouched against her side. She sat alone, pressed against the window, tears streaking down her cheeks as she tried to stifle them with the edge of her sleeve. The world around her continued without notice, commuters lost in their phones, students chatting in hushed voices, an older man dozing in his seat. For a moment, he hesitated. Soldiers are trained to act when danger calls, not when a stranger's grief unfolds quietly in a corner. Protocol, in both his professional and personal life, urged him to remain still, to maintain the invisible wall between his world and that of civilians. But something in the way her shoulders shook, small and fragile against the vastness of the carriage, pierced through his restraint. He remembered standing at funerals, watching mothers weep into folded flags. The sight of this girl's tears was different but carried the same raw truth. Grief, unacknowledged, is a burden too heavy for one body to bear. Without fully deciding, he shifted his seat, the leather creaking softly beneath him. The movement caught her attention, and she quickly wiped at her eyes, embarrassed to have been seen. She sniffled and turned her face away, staring out at the darkening fields rushing past the glass. He considered speaking, but words felt clumsy in his throat. Instead, he simply sat beside her, leaving a respectful space, but making it clear that she was not alone. At first, she did not respond. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the rhythm of the train. But slowly, perhaps sensing that his presence was not judgmental, her breath steadied. She whispered, almost too softly to hear, "I'm sorry. I don't mean to bother anyone." He shook his head gently, his voice calm and low when he finally replied, "You're not a bother." Her lips trembled, as if debating whether to trust him with the weight she carried. She glanced at him briefly, and in that glance she noticed the stillness in his bearing, the quiet gravity that seemed to anchor him. Something about it gave her courage. The soldier did not press. He knew better than anyone that silence was not emptiness. It was space, a place where truth might surface if allowed to breathe. And after a long pause, the girl spoke again, her words fragile, broken between small sobs. "It's just, my father, he passed away last month. And everyone tells me to be strong, but I can't." Not all the time. The words struck him like a bell inside his chest. He had been trained to hold his composure, to embody respect in those moments, but nothing prepared him for hearing it spoken in the trembling voice of a child, on an ordinary train, far from thick marble silence of memorial grounds. He had heard countless variations of that sentence at gravesides, seen the same ache etched into the faces of families standing before the tomb. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he let the moment breathe, honoring her courage and saying it aloud. Finally, he said softly, "You don't have to be strong all the time." She looked at him, startled. The adults in her life had told her the opposite. Be strong for your mother, for your siblings, for yourself. Be strong so you don't make others uncomfortable. Be strong because weakness won't change anything. And yet here was this soldier, this figure of discipline, telling her it was all right to fall apart. Her eyes filled again, not with shame this time, but with something closer to relief. The train rattled on. Outside, the sun dipped lower, staining the horizon in shades of gold and purple. Inside, the conversation continued, halting at first but gathering strength like a fragile flame shielded from the wind. She told him about her father's laughter, how he used to sing off-key in the car, how he never missed a school play even when work made him tired. She confessed her guilt, that sometimes she tried not to think about him because it hurt too much, and then she felt like she was betraying his memory. The guard listened in silence, his face calm but his mind stirred by echoes of his own memories. He remembered the first funeral he had stood watch over as a tomb guard. The weight of silence then had been crushing, a responsibility he was barely old enough to shoulder. He remembered the look in the family's eyes, that desperate search for meaning in loss, that need for assurance their loved one was not forgotten. And here was this girl, carrying the same question in her young heart. Does memory fade when tears dry, or does love hold it firm? When she faltered, he spoke again, his words measured, each one deliberate. Your father lives in every story you tell, every laugh you remember, every detail you hold close. Forgetting is not what happens when you stop crying. Forgetting only happens when you stop remembering. Her breath caught, and she wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. But it hurts, she whispered. He nodded. It will hurt, because love leaves an imprint, and grief is its echo. You don't erase the echo. You learn to live with its sound. She looked at him for a long moment, studying the lines of his face, the unshakable calm. And then she asked, almost timidly, "How do you know that?" The soldier's gaze shifted to the window, where fields blurred into shadows. He thought of the countless hours he had spent guarding the tomb, the weight of names carved into stone, the endless roll call of absence. "Because I stand for people like him every day," he said quietly. "And I've seen how their families carry on. They don't stop hurting, but they also don't stop loving. Both can exist together." The girl's shoulders eased, as if a small piece of her burden had been lifted by his words. She leaned back against the seat, her sobs quieted now into deep breaths. For the first time in weeks perhaps, she allowed herself to feel without the pressure of hiding it. The train's rhythm filled the space between them again, steady and grounding. Other passengers remained oblivious, their worlds separate. But within that small bubble of seats by the window, something sacred was unfolding. A child was learning that her grief was not weakness, and a soldier was reminded that his duty was not only to the fallen, but to the living who carried their memory. The train rattled deeper into the twilight, and the once muted hum of the carriage seemed far away, as if the world had narrowed itself to just the soldier and the girl. The silence between them now was not heavy, not uncomfortable, but alive with the words that had already been spoken. She glanced at him again, her eyes still red, her cheeks damp, but her posture less hunched, less crushed beneath the invisible weight she carried. She was no longer alone in her sorrow, and that, in itself, was a kind of healing. For a while, they sat without speaking. The soldier had long ago learned the value of silence, how sometimes it carried more meaning than words. Yet he also sensed the girl had more to say, pieces of her grief still locked away. And sure enough, as the train passed through the glow of a small station, she whispered, "Do you ever wonder if people really notice? I mean, the ones who aren't family, do they remember? Or do they just move on?" He drew in a long breath, the question striking deep. It was a thought he had wrestled with himself, standing guard in the pouring rain, in blistering heat, in the dead of night when no visitors came. Did the public really notice? Did they understand the depth of the sacrifice represented by the tomb he guarded? Or was it all to some just another monument, another tourist stop? He turned to her, his expression steady but softened. "Not everyone remembers," he admitted. "Some people pass by without seeing. Some listen to speeches and forget them before the day is over. But there are always those who do notice, always those who carry the memory with them, even if it's not their family." You'd be surprised how many strangers have stood in front of that tomb with tears in their eyes. Respect doesn't need everyone, it only needs someone. And often, that's enough. The girl's gaze lowered to her lap, where her hands twisted the strap of her backpack. His words settled into her like seeds, fragile but full of promise. She had believed her father's life mattered only to those closest to him, that beyond her family, the world had already forgotten. Now she realized memory could ripple outward in ways unseen, reaching people she would never know. Her tears returned, but softer this time, no longer frantic. And in that moment, the soldier understood that his watch at the tomb, his silence through storms and seasons, was not only for the fallen, but for the living, to remind them, to reassure them, to stand as proof that sacrifice endures beyond the boundaries of family. They came like rain that nourishes rather than destroys. The train slowed as it entered a tunnel, lights flickering briefly before the darkness settled over them. It felt fitting, as if the world itself paused to frame the intimacy of their exchange. And then, in the dim glow of the carriage lights, she said something that broke open the soldier's heart in a way few things ever had. "I just wish," she whispered, "I had told him more. That I loved him. That I noticed how hard he worked. I thought I had more time. Now I'll never get to say it." Her voice cracked, and she covered her mouth with her sleeve. The soldier's chest tightened. He thought of the countless young men and women whose names were etched into stone, lives cut short before words of love could be spoken, before dreams could be fulfilled. He thought of families clutching medals and folded flags, haunted by the same regret this girl now carried. He leaned forward slightly, his tone firm yet gentle. "You still can." She blinked at him, startled. "What do you mean?" He met her gaze steadily. "When you remember him, when you talk about him, when you live in a way that reflects what he taught you, that's still telling him. Love doesn't vanish when a person is gone. It just changes form. Every time you carry his lessons, every time you laugh at a memory, every time you whisper his name, you're still speaking to him. And he still matters." The girl's lips trembled, and then a faint, shaky smile appeared. It was the kind of smile that comes not from joy, but from relief, from the realization that grief need not be a wall but a bridge. She nodded slowly, as if finally believing that her love had not been lost with her father's passing. The train emerged from the tunnel, the sudden light streaming through the windows like a benediction. The girl closed her eyes, letting it warm her face, and the soldier felt a quiet shift within himself. For years he had stood as a guardian of silence, his role defined by absence, by what could no longer be said. But here, beside a grieving child, he realized that silence could also be presence, a vessel through which the living found the courage to speak. As the journey neared its end, the girl spoke again, her voice steadier now. "Thank you. I didn't think anyone would understand." The soldier gave a small nod. "You'd be surprised how many do. Sometimes, we just don't say it out loud." When the train finally pulled into her stop, she gathered her things, pausing for a moment before standing. She looked at him, her eyes no longer full of despair, but of something quieter, more enduring, gratitude. She whispered, "I'll remember this." And then, with a small bow of her head, she stepped off into the evening, disappearing into the crowd beyond the platform. The soldier remained seated, watching her go. Around him, passengers shuffled, adjusting coats and collecting bags. But he stayed still, his mind heavy with reflection. She had entered the train as a stranger, and left having altered something fundamental within him. He had broken protocol once before in his life, stepping forward when silence became complicity. This time, he had not broken rules, but he had crossed another line. He had allowed his humanity to speak louder than his uniform. And in doing so, he had been reminded why he wore it at all. That night, as he returned to his quarters, the encounter lingered. He thought of her father, a man he would never meet, yet whose memory had reached him through the tears of a child. He thought of the way her words mirrored the quiet confessions of countless families, the way grief echoed across generations, binding strangers together in shared understanding. And he knew that the girl's story would stay with him, guiding his steps as surely as the oath he had sworn. The lesson was clear, simple, unforgettable. Duty is not only about standing guard over the dead, but about carrying compassion for the living. Respect is not just a salute at a tomb, but a willingness to sit beside a grieving child on a train and listen. In the weeks that followed, he carried this truth with him into every silent watch. As tourists passed, as storms raged, as seasons shifted, he thought of the girl's trembling voice, her whispered regrets, and the small, fragile smile that followed. It reminded him that the silence he embodied was not emptiness but presence, the kind of presence that tells the world, you are not forgotten, you are not alone. Neither would know the full impact they had on one another's lives, but both carried away a gift. She found comfort in the knowledge that love endures, and he found renewal in the reminder that his silent duty spoke louder than any words. And so, the soldier's story and the girl's tears became intertwined, two threads woven into the larger fabric of remembrance. Sometimes that happens in grand ceremonies, but sometimes, perhaps more powerfully, it happens quietly, on an ordinary train, between a soldier and a schoolgirl, bound together by grief, gratitude, and hope. As the story closes, the call lingers gently. Hold on to the people you love. Tell them what they mean to you while you still can. And never underestimate the power of listening when someone needs to be heard. The takeaway was as profound as it was simple. To honor is to remember, to listen, to bear witness. Share your stories of compassion and remembrance, because in doing so, you keep the echoes of love alive.